Cesium-137, the devastating radiation that was released into the air after the massive Chernobyl explosion, affecting all wild and plant life. Let's get into the horrifying effects after one of the world's most infamous explosions. We know there was an issue with the wild boars in the area already, and at first scientists thought it was because of the Chernobyl explosion. The problem is, they aren't losing their radiation, and we don't know why up until now. Cesium-137, which was the radiation that was set out by the Chernobyl explosion, has a half-life of about 30 years. Over time, it should start to settle and sink into the soil for good, even if animals are still eating the vegetation from these areas. It should slowly go away. But now, with the new discovery of these boars not losing their radiation over time and pretty much staying at the same level, researchers had to delve deeper into why that was. They discovered that there were also levels of Cesium-135 in their favorite food, the truffles, which was caused by past nuclear testings from the 60s. Cesium-135 has a much longer half-life than Cesium-137 as well, finally giving us an answer as to why these boars will not chill out with the radiation. This was further proved when they checked their DNA samples, with 68% of their radiation levels coming from Cesium-135. Who knows if this is the case for other animals in the area as well. Did you know there's only one species of wild horses left in the world, and they decided to make their home in Chernobyl? Originally though, you could find these bad boys all across Europe. They were quite the populated species. But of course, over the years with humans intervening with everything around them, they became severely endangered. So over time, when scientists started looking at Chernobyl and went, hey, the animals aren't actually doing half bad here, they then decided to chuck 36 of these horses in there and see what would happen. Which is kind of stupid. Radiation, no matter how little, is not good to be around. After 4 years, the horses managed to double their population with the lack of people in the area. There's even cute photos of them using abandoned buildings as shelter. But back to the radiation, there's still the issue of them consuming vegetation that has been soaking in the soil. When radiation begins to settle after being in the air for so long, the only way for it to go is down. It just keeps getting down further into the dirt forever, but the problem is it takes a very long time. And during that time period, vegetation is still growing with the chemicals inside of them. The Chernobyl frogs are one of my favorite mutated creatures to talk about. For quite a bit of time, people wondered if the frogs in the Exclusion Zone all gained their dark color from the radiation after the explosion. It's actually false. It's due to an even cooler effect. Although yes, it's more than likely that these frogs are radioactive to some capacity, it's actually the natural melanin in these frogs that allowed them to continue on living in this area. The black frogs that were in Chernobyl before the explosion were a smaller minority, but now, since all the frogs with the lighter green colors are pushing out into the outer zones, this gave them the chance to populate at a faster rate. This is very intriguing though. Now we have a whole new discovery with melanin being almost a blockage to radiation, or at least allows them to handle the situation better. One researcher stated, melanin is known to protect against radiation because it mechanically avoids the production of free radicals, which are unstable atoms that can damage cells, caused by the direct impact of the radioactive particles on cells. Radiation can induce oxidative stress and damage essential structures for life such as the membrane of cells or even DNA. Did you know the dogs in Chernobyl have superpowers? No, they can't turn invisible or fly, but rather as the generation of canines continued onward, their bodies started to adapt with the radiation that their ancestors from the explosion experienced. Sadly, when the nuclear reactor exploded, everyone had to evacuate the area quickly, with the majority of people leaving their dogs behind. When they were doing research on these puppies and seeing the side effects later down the line, they realized that they had pockets of radioisotopes. And what that basically means is that because they were born with radiation already in them, it is so intertwined within their DNA. It's messed up their genetics so much that there are now 15 distinct genetic groups. It doesn't matter how many dogs in a small area would mate with each other, their genetics would all be drastically different from one another. I'll reiterate it again, just because they seem to be thriving on this doesn't mean it's okay. Thankfully, there are measures being put in place to spay the animals, and right now there are over 400 of them that were properly taken care of. The Chernobyl explosion wasn't just a one and done event, it completely changed the ecosystem around it, infecting everyone and everything with terrible amounts of radiation. Let's dive into what Chernobyl has turned into since then. The catfish that live in the cooling ponds of Chernobyl were thought to be mutated because of how big they've grown, and these guys are massive, with one that was caught from the pool measuring at about 1.65 meters. Everyone believed it was the radiation that gave them their monster size, but no, it's actually because no one is there to disturb their growth. Like the majority of animals in this area though, this doesn't mean they're not radioactive, they just seem to be handling it decently. When the explosion happened, the workers immediately needed to cool this thing down with a bunch of water. But of course, when they were done, where were they gonna put it all? That's right, straight into the cooling pond. All the marine wildlife that was living in these ponds got a strong taste of pure cesium-137. They still are a major attraction despite them not actually being mutated, with their resilience and willpower to thrive under extreme conditions. If they were given the chance to grow in the wild, some of them can get as large as 5 meters long. Depending on how things evolve, maybe we'll get to see just that with the Chernobyl catfish. We cannot forget the side effects it also had on humans, and not for those that were there when the explosion happened, but also to generations down the line. For some reason though, unlike the Chernobyl puppies, humans didn't bounce back as well as they did. Also known as Chernobyl Hearts, many people who were born years after suffered with a lot of underlying health conditions, the biggest one being cardiac degradation. As the years progress, your heart over time starts to break down little by little. Especially for those in their younger years, they arguably get it the worst. Because their bodies are still new, naturally it needs to constantly be taking in a lot of nutrients to grow. But because of this, it is also speeding up the radiation process that is stuck within their DNA. It's quite terrifying, and there's nothing anyone can really do about it. Some of the side effects with cardiac degradation include high pressure levels and developing literal holes within your heart. There is potential surgery to help with this, but it is extremely limited and a very expensive procedure. Thankfully though, there are programs and companies out there that cater to these people and help them as much as possible. Maybe not everyone is doing so bad after the explosion though. Also known as the Babushkas of Chernobyl, there is a group of old ladies who are living their best life out in the exclusion zone. For the most part. One woman, age 75, named Valentina Ivanivna says the exclusion zone is not a prison, who even fishes in a river that passes the old nuclear plant. She is a firm believer that life is so much better in comparison to that in the city. In Kiev, I'd have passed long ago, 5 times over. Every car releases the whole periodic table into the air, and you inhale that into your lungs, she would continue to state. Within the actual documentary, Babushkas of Chernobyl, there is a scene where she is being examined at a medical clinic to see how her levels of cesium were. The doctor told her that she was fine, but despite that, still obviously warned her to be wary about what she consumed from the soil. One speculation that they were making as to why she was okay was possibly due to socio-psychological factors, kinda similar to the story of a woman lifting up a car to save her child. One of the coolest but also terrifying changes that happened right after the Chernobyl explosion was the effect that it had on nearby forest. Now, what is known as the Red Forest, hours after the explosion happened, the trees in the forest started to drastically change. They did not lose their leaves, but instead they turned a very auburn red color. It's almost as if they rusted from the amount of radiation that swept through. It was very clear that all these trees were no longer alive, but for some reason they weren't decaying. Upon closer examination, researchers discovered that all the organisms needed to make this part of the process possible were all affected by radiation. They couldn't do their jobs properly. Once given the chance, people got to work on clearing the area by getting rid of all the trees. But back in 2015, however, a devastating forest fire caused all the radiation particles to get tossed back into the air after they were beginning to settle, bringing them back to stage 1. And then again, when soldiers made their way through the forest in 2022, all their machinery caused the earth to stir again. There is no rest for the Red Forest. What are your favorite facts from Chernobyl? Let me know down below, and I will see you all in the next video.